Good chilly morning, team. It is Bo. I am Bo Weldon, a passionate and professional wildlife guide based here in Western Wyoming. In this video, we are going to be talking about the difference between Jackson versus Jackson Hole, which one is which, and kind of the history of how these names got to be in our vernacular. If you're new to this channel, a little bit about me, I have been leading trips out here for nearly 10 years. I love this place so much, and I want to get into this longer form of content to explain how incredible this place is, because as you can see behind me, it's pretty amazing. So stick around all the way through this video to learn the difference between Jackson and Jackson Hole, but also I'll throw in a few other bonus fun facts that I bet you didn't know about this ecosystem. Stay tuned. Jackson versus Jackson Hole, which one is which? This is a question that I get while I am leading wildlife and landscape trips out here all the time. And when we think about the differences between these two places, we have to go back in time. Now, let me first say, of course, that when we say Jackson Hole, that is a term that is coming from European colonization, exploration of this place, right? Native peoples have been using this valley, this entire ecosystem for almost 11, some say maybe in 12,000 years, right? So we are kind of, we're not going all the way back in time in human presence in this ecosystem. We're going back to the European settlement of it. And when we go back there, we think of a couple key figures. We think of folks like John Coulter, Jim Bridger, William Sublette, these mountain men, as they are commonly referred to as, that explored some of these areas, quote unquote, first. Again, with that caveat. Now, when they're exploring this area, the term hole, H-O-L-E, that's what I'll be referring to on the rest of this video, that comes from kind of that genre, that group of people, those mountain men. And what it referred to as is actually what we can see behind me. And this is why I decided to film this video right here, is because the term hole comes from the idea of a depression, a valley that is surrounded entirely by mountains. So, of course, the Tetons behind me, especially as they're getting lit up in that beautiful morning light, are the sassy and dramatic ones, but they are not the only ones that form this boundary. So if we break it down by cardinal direction, we have the Tetons are to our west. South of us, we have the Snake River Mountains, and at some level, almost the Wyoming range of mountains as well. Behind the camera, over here to the east, we have the Gros Ventre Mountains. If you're visiting this area and your French isn't quite what it used to be, you might pronounce this Gros Ventre. And to the north up here, we have the Absaroka Mountains. Some say Absaroka as well. So if we think again, that term hole, it means a place that is surrounded by mountains. Now, if we think about our valley here, of course, it is very unique. We have about 55 miles in length. The Tetons themselves are about 45 miles in length, north to south. The valley changes somewhere between 6 and almost 15, 13 miles across. And in this valley in particular, the major player here, of course, is the National Park Service in the Department of the Interior. But we also have property here from the USGS, from the Bureau of Land Management, and then the other two big players would be the United States Forest Service. If you can tell me what department the U.S. Forest Service is in the comments, you'll get bonus points. It's a trick question. And then the last one would be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that runs the National Elk Refuge, which is down to our south from here. Okay, team, so we've got the idea of where does the term hole come from? It comes from that depression. But what about the name Jackson? Who is that named after? And of course, this is named after some dead white guy. A lot of things in the West are named after white explorers. Again, there is generations and generations and generations of other folks, native peoples, who have been here a long time. But when we think of Jackson, we think of one individual, and that is David E. Jackson. David E. Jackson is kind of in that group of folks with John Coulter and Jim Bridger and some of these early mountain men exploring out here. And specifically, David E. Jackson is a very good fur trapper. So he's coming out here with another fellow by the name of Jedediah Smith, who is exploring this area for the potential to start their own fur trading company. Now, David Jackson lived homesteaded primarily in the southern part of the valley, though he explored this entire region. And William Sublette, another one of his business partners, ostensibly, he said that this area was Jackson's Hole, a possessive S on the end of Jackson, because it was an area that he spent so much time hunting and trapping and exploring. So originally, it is Jackson's Hole, because that was, again, this little valley surrounded by mountains. Now, for some context, Jedediah Smith is the name of the wilderness boundary on the other side of the Tetons. Over behind the camera over here, we have the Bridger-Teton National Forest. And then the county south of us is Sublette County in Wyoming, named after William Sublette. John Coulter has a lot of namesakes, but in particular for the Tetons, in the park, we have the Coulter Bay Marina and the Coulter Bay Visitor Center, named after John Coulter. So some of these names have stuck around. The last comparative I'll throw in there, y'all, is that the other side of the Tetons, the Idaho side of the Tetons, originally that was actually called Pierre's Hole. Again, a possessive S on the end of that guy's name, because, you guessed it, there was a French, with the name Pierre, a French fur trapper who lived over there, and that was referred to as Pierre's Hole. So kind of think of like these little areas bouncing between these mountains as these little kind of regions that were defined primarily by these explorers that spent the most amount of time there. Okay, team, I have to pause the video here just for a second. If you consider subscribing to this channel, that does mean a lot. Again, this is a newer form of content for me, but I'm told by the internet and friends who actually are good at this YouTube stuff that subscribing to the channel, liking these videos, maybe tossing in a comment or two in there really does help the YouTube algorithm demigods decide that this is of value. Anyway, let's get back to where the name and how the whole and all this come together. Here we go. So the town of Jackson, of course, holds the same name, same guy we've been talking about, David E. Jackson. Ostensibly now, you can kind of put those two names together that, yeah, I'm going to Jackson Hole. They're probably going to spend more time in Jackson, maybe some more time in Teton Village, which is one of the few towns that is also in the valley. So we have Jackson, Teton Village, we have Wilson, we have Moose, and we have Moran and Kelly. So there are a couple other towns, some of those are just incorporated territory, but that are also in the entire valley. But really, nowadays, Jackson and Jackson Hole, kind of the same thing. But if you're kind of being traditional in your reference, saying, I'm going to visit Jackson Hole, that might mean that you're visiting this entire area, and you're actually not just spending all your time in town. As promised, team, here are a few fun facts that I bet you didn't know about this ecosystem, specifically Jackson Hole. Number one, there are no venomous snakes in Jackson Hole, in the valley. The rest of Wyoming, the rest of Idaho, the rest of Montana, they do have rattlesnakes, prairie rattlesnakes in particular. Those are venomous snakes, but in this valley, we do not have any venomous snakes. Now, it's not particularly colder here than it is in those places, but our theory is that, getting back to that name hole, that the snakes cannot naturally disperse into this area. So we have all these beautiful other critters, but we don't have prairie rattlesnakes, which some people, including my wife, are just fine with. Okay, number two, the Tetons behind us are, yes, they're sassy and beautiful and dramatic, but they are actually the youngest mountain range in the valley. They are roughly, give or take, between 5 to 8 million years old. But what's really neat about them is that they are actually the youngest mountain range, but they have some of the most exposed, oldest rock in the valley across the country. We'll see if we'll do another video on that one. Number three, ooh, it's cold out here. Number three is that David E. Jackson, he is actually an interesting character. He kind of founds Jackson Hole and all this stuff. He's actually kind of a world traveler after his time here, and he actually dies in Paris, France in 1837 due to typhus fever, which is pretty wild to think of somebody living here, trapping, doing all of this business here, and then especially back then, traveling all the way to Paris and then not making it back. So just kind of a fun tidbit on him. Number four, this side of the mountains, this valley right here, of course, Teton County is one of the wealthiest counties in the country now, but this valley right here was actually not very well sought after in the 1800s and maybe even arguably in the early 1900s. Because of all the glacial activity that we've had here, agriculturally, our soils are really poor. I'm just going to leave it at that because I want to do another whole video explaining why in 1890, real estate here, pretty easy to come by, versus nowadays, a little bit more challenging. Alrighty, team. That is it. That is, in a nutshell, the difference between Jackson versus Jackson Hole. Again, this is a pretty simple explanation. One refers to the entire valley, one refers to just the town. It's named after the same guy, but it's one I get all the time on tour. So, thanks for watching this video. I really appreciate y'all's engagement with this longer form of content. Again, if there's a question or a concept that you want more explanation on, feel free to write that down in the comments and we can talk about what that is. There are so many things to talk about out here, and I know a lot of them. I certainly don't know all of them, but if you want to talk about it, gang, let's dive in. Let's get into the nitty gritty. We'll see you on the next video. I'm going to get back to enjoying this sunrise. Towdy tracks. Yep. That's really pretty.